I will use the microphone. It is my great pleasure to introduce His Excellency Fernando Henrique Cardoso. A native of Rio de Janeiro, our distinguished guest received his PhD in sociology from the University of Sao Paulo, and he conducted postgraduate study at the Laboratory of Industrial Sociology at the University of Paris. He started his academic career in 1958 as professor of sociology at USP, as many of us have come to know the University of Sao Paulo. In 1964, he was blacklisted from teaching during what I will call an unscheduled change in government. And he worked as a professor in Chile and in France. I sense that Paris may be his second city of birth in many respects. He became internationally prominent in the 1960s and 70s through his pioneering work on dependency theory. This is maybe a misnomer in English because it really looks at the synergy and networks that form between underdeveloped countries and industrialized countries. So a healthy interdependence. And international trade is a key to this process. This has been a highly influential body of research, especially in development studies, and it's influenced many areas of the social sciences. After returning to Brazil and serving in the Brazilian Senate for a number of years, our guest was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs in 1992 and then Minister of Finance in 1993. Now, it's interesting to note, not trained as an economist, trained as a sociologist. He reformed the Brazilian monetary system through his Plan Real, ushering in a new currency, lowering inflation rates, which were punishing at the time, and providing much-needed fiscal discipline to his beloved country of Brazil. Based in part on this financial plan for his country, he was elected president in 1995 and re-elected in 1998. During his presidency, and this is maybe the greatest tribute that any national leader can receive, a popular constitutional referendum was passed to specifically allow President Cardoso, I want to call him Professor Cardoso, but I get to that in a minute, President Cardoso to serve a second four-year term. Previously, there had been one-term limits to the presidency. His fiscal policies and market reforms are widely credited with leading to the foundation of Brazil's current economic growth and increasingly important as one of the great global economies. Since his departure from elected office in 2003, I think it's safe to say that our honored guest has not been leisurely walking the streets of Paris. He has served as president of the Club of Madrid. He has been a member of the Board of Trustees of the Rockefeller Foundation, and he holds academic positions at Brown University and at Princeton's Institute for Advanced Study. In particular, at Brown, he is the professor at large in the Watson Institute for International Studies, and I know that he has had a big impact at Brown. He's also founded the Instituto Fernando Henrique Cardoso in Sao Paulo. And it's interesting, if you look in his memoir, which I'll refer to in a minute, he modeled this institute after the presidential library system in the United States. He holds honorary doctorates and has received major awards from so many places that we don't have time for me just to list them quickly. It's a stunningly impressive record of accomplishments. He has also been named one of the world's 100 leading intellectuals, so I think you get a sense of the rare treat you're about to enjoy. Let me just mention a couple of his many books. Dependency and Development in Latin America, which was published in 1979, and charting a new course, The Politics of Globalization and Social Reform, published during his second term as President of Brazil. His most recent book, which I borrowed, a little prop here, The Accidental President of Brazil, a memoir published in 2006. I especially love the opening sentence of Chapter 10, and I'm going to read it to you because I think it tells us, it even unmasks many wonderful qualities about our distinguished guest. And this is during the part of his memoir when he becomes President of Brazil. It took me only 3 days as president to see that I was in big trouble. And I think most presidents come very quickly to realize that. What a rare opportunity on this great, great moment in the history of our center that started as a focused effort to work with the great country of Brazil. We have the opportunity to give a very warm Vanderbilt welcome to President Fernando Henrique Cardoso. Professor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know how to start because I have been received at this place so warmly, with surrounded by so nice people, and now just listening what has been said by our dean, I don't know what to say to you. I had prepared a formal speech to you, but I rather made a different thing. You know why? Because Professor Ted Fisher, when he starts speaking here, this is a political man, my God. So he incited me not to be just an academic, not to read a paper, because it's a little bit more boring. I will leave the paper with you, and maybe it will be more interesting to speak more freely with you about the subject. The subject is about democracy in Latin America. So I made maybe a speech less organized, but I hope a little bit more interesting than just by reading a paper that you can read after the conclusion of this speech, if you want, but preferably not. Well, why are we? Let's see first that it's really a very honor to me to be here because this is the 60th anniversary of the Center of Brazilian Studies. This is really a very rare occasion. You know, it's difficult to understand how it was possible in 1947 to have a Center of Brazilian Studies here in the United States. And this is very impressive. I was telling Professor Fisher that I know several parts of the world. I'm frequently going back to Paris or to UK or to Spain, in several parts in Latin America. Only in the United States is possible this kind of thing. To have so many people interested to understand what's going on in Brazil and in Latin America. You have some in UK. You have in Oxford a center, because I myself I sponsored the center when I was president. So now they are closing the center because I'm no more president. And in Paris you have one chair at the University of Paris, and that's all. In America, in every university I visit, there are a group of people who are capable to speak to me in good Portuguese, much better than my English, and they have a lot of information about Brazil. So this is really very, very impressive. And the fact that you have been the first one pioneering this area of studies is wonderful. And today, coming a little bit around the university, I show an exhibit in which a former Brazilian president has been to Vanderbilt, President Dutra. And President Dutra received a flower from a lady, and I received today a flower from the same lady. At the time she was a baby. Now she's young. But it's impressive that President Dutra came to this place. And by chance, by reading my book, maybe, I don't know, in that book I refer to the fact, but President Dutra was a general. In Brazil, everyone is a general. So in the past, all presidents have been generals, and Dutra was a general. And he served Vargas. Vargas was at the beginning was a dictator, and then was elected president. And Dutra became elected president after one of our redemocratizations. And by chance, Dutra was aide de chambre of my grandfather, who was also a general. So it was, to me, a pleasure to see Dutra, and now I'm in the same place, and we are celebrating 60th anniversary of this center. Congratulations to you. So why we are so anxious in Latin America, and not just in Latin America, also in America, to debate about the democracy in Latin America? By different reasons. As everyone knows, in our continent, during the Cold War, in several countries, we had military regime, an authoritarian regime, either civilian or military, but authoritarian regimes. From the 60s on, we had basically military regimes with one or another exception. Even countries like Chile, with an old tradition of democracy, became a dictatorship. When I was in exile after the first Brazilian military coup in '64, I moved from Brazil to Chile, passing through Argentina. And I lived in Chile in '64 up to '68. And the Chileans were very proud. They said, well, Chile is not like Brazil or Argentina, because Brazil and Argentina are all time under dictatorship. We have a democratic tradition. And they had, in fact, a democratic tradition. And later on, after Allende, I was there again for 3 or 4 months at the end of Allende period. Again, we have a dictatorship in Chile. And this was a kind of a cyclical history in our region, in Latin America. Democracy was always, well, for a while, and not well rooted in the region. So the question now is, we have democracy now. Is it forever? Who can say yes? I don't know. But anyhow, I think that the challenge we are facing in Latin America, in different countries in Latin America, are very profound. And I think we learn how to deal with some challenges. The more recent ones are related to different problems. I will refer to you to 3 problems. One is the lack of democracy after the Cold War years. See? The lack of freedom, torture, the non-respect to human rights, so on and so forth. This was a tremendous problem. So to qualify as a formal democracy, we don't have the normal architecture of a democracy: elections, independent Congress, free of the media, so on and so forth. This was widespread in Latin America, one another exception, but basically this was the mood in the area. So after the 80s, we start to try to reorganize the region and to try to set up a more open political system. But then we discover, because of democracy, and suddenly, that the problem was not just to have elections. The problem is to solve people's problems, and how to solve people's problems under democracy. And poor people's problem, because in fact we are basically, at the time more yet, underdeveloped countries and highly unjust, with high levels of income concentration, poverty, so on and so forth. So you had to face redemocratization plus some instruments to cope with social demands coming from the poor people and middle-class people in the area. On top of that, the world changed a lot. We had globalization, a new animal, a new phenomenon. And we had no idea about how to cope with globalization. Just to give you a sense of that, I will repeat something that I said this morning to a group of students. When I was in Chile in '64, '67, the book you referred has been published in America in '79, I guess, the Dependency and Development. But this book was, the draft of the book was prepared in 66, and then 67, and in 69, the Spanish version was already published in Mexico. What was about? It was about, without our knowledge, the beginnings of globalization. We're trying to understand how the situation would evolve in Latin America. We start from the old ideas coming from Economic Commission for Latin America, basically Raúl Prebisch's ideas, which are an Argentinian economist, about the relationship between the center and periphery. The idea was you have some developed countries, and the developed countries compose the central part of the capitalist system, and at the periphery of the capitalist system, there are underdeveloped countries. And the Prebisch's idea was that, well, this will continue like that, insofar the trade situation remains equal. And why? Because the developing countries are export-oriented countries, and they do export commodities, and they have to import industrialized goods. And if you look at on a historical series, the behavior of industrialized goods and the behavior of commodities are always ups and downs and toward the downs. Meanwhile, the industrial goods are steadily going up. So there is lots of consideration to add to this. There is an explanation. Why is this? Why the rules of the international trade are not working? Why Ricardo is not working so well as we expected before? Well, Prebisch gave several, hints to understand why. Anyhow, let's put this aside. So when I came to Chile, my debate inside Economic Commission for Latin America with Prebisch and others, founding fathers of that theory, including a Brazilian named Celso Furtado, was, well, we have to add, this was my view, some ingredients, non-typically economic ingredients to understand the situation. We have to add some political and sociological considerations. It's not enough to refer to a center and a periphery. It depends how the different countries at the periphery relates to the center, the interdependence. How do they engage with the center? There are different kinds of engagement. I'm not going to elaborate tonight that, but anyhow, the opposite ones are, you have an enclave situation in which you have external investment at the periphery. They extract the miner from the periphery, they send abroad, to sell abroad, then the profits stay in the hands of those who have invested. So the local economy has a very thin part of the whole process. See, only the wages within the enclave plus the taxes. So this produces a kind of society. Middle class is extremely difficult because for the base for middle class will be, well, the taxation. So there are bureaucratic middle class. You have a working class inside the enclave and the peasants without any change. This is Bolivia, for instance. If you contrast that with Mexico or with Brazil or Argentina, it's quite obvious that the cycle, the economic cycle was quite different, because you have domestic formation, savings in formation of capital, domestic control of some parts of the productive system. So it's totally different. So my argument was, well, it's not enough to speak about an homogeneous periphery and a center. You have to make differentiations among the different styles of engagement to the center. And more recently, I'm referring to the 60s, more recently it was clear that some foreign, not multinational companies were investing in the area. For instance, the car production in Brazil was already done, starting in the middle of the 50s. In the 60s, it was there. So at that time, the interest on the big corporation was tied to the local interest, because they have to expand the domestic market, because these cars were not produced to be sent abroad. They were produced to be sold within the nation. So it's different. So I try to explain that, and we will use a concept named the internationalization of the market. We had no idea. This was the beginning of globalization in practice. A new form of globalization. Why new? You know, the capitalist system has been always universal. We had slaves in Brazil, in America, to produce, cotton or food and to export. We are connected. You have like a sugar cane in the northeast of Brazil or in the Caribbean, financed by the Dutch, and to be used at the international level. So this is an old story. The capitalist system always has some aspects of globalization. But what was new? New was the fact that the industry started to be effective at the periphery. So they are investing not to produce commodities, but to produce industrialized goods at the periphery. So this was quite different from what happened before. At that time, several people believed, well, in order to overcome underdevelopment, it would be necessary a socialist revolution. Otherwise, it would be impossible to go ahead with development. That was not my view. I said, maybe if you prefer, I can prefer a more egalitarian society, but it's not true that necessarily to develop, it would be necessary to be a socialist. It's possible to have some forms of development within the capitalist system. So this was a tremendous debate among the left, so on and so forth. But we were describing the idea that the productive system was beginning to become internationalized. The concept was rather a non-adequate concept, because internationalization of the markets. No, it was the internationalization of the productive system. We had the concept of multinationals in the 60s. The idea of the label multinationals was created by Vernon here in the 70s. So I had no idea. It was a blind analysis of globalization. Anyhow, it was one of the first analyses trying to understand what the effects of globalization. Now, when I refer to more recently to an additional challenge to improve democracy, to try to reduce poverty, so on and so forth, under new conditions. Why? Because now globalization means another thing. It means the internationalization of the financial system. And this is a consequence of modern technology. And as a consequence of modern technology, of IT technology, and of consequence of the revolution in transportation means, it was possible to widespread the productive system. Now the Caterpillar had the financial headquarters here in Nashville. Other parts of Caterpillar are in other parts of the world. The same applies to different countries. And when you have, the call center, you dial your telephone, and probably the person replying you is from China, or from India, or from Brazil, or from Mexico, I don't know where. So this is quite new, and this has been possible because of an enormous transformation in the technological basis of a modern productive system. Well, this is easy to say, to describe now. But in the 80s, we had to face how to engage the Brazilian economy, the Chilean economy, the Mexican economy into the global system, and how to keep democracy working, and to what extent it would be possible to do simultaneously that, and more than that, to offer better conditions of life for the people. So it's a tremendous challenge that Latin America was facing, as well as other parts of the world. But we are focused on Latin America. The reaction was not homogeneous alongside the region. We had different possibilities, different strategies, different solutions. Some countries have been more successful than others. But this was the question, and this is yet our question in terms of the reinforcement of democratic values within a context of social differentiation, poverty, plus a challenge to be more engaged at the international level and to reorganize your productive system to be capable to compete at the global level. And in order to do all that, we had also to introduce some modifications in the way how our governments were organized, the state, the form of state organization. Because the tradition in our area in Latin America was rather of each economy is separate from the other, and to try to protect our domestic market by increasing tariffs. And maybe by giving also some incentives to local producers by, for instance, reducing interest rates or giving some subsidies to some industry. And the state very often was also investing to, to permit the production necessary for the development of the country. Let's take the case of Brazil. In Brazil, in the 70s, 60s and 70s, the government was very active in investing since the 50s, since Vargas. So if you look the energy system, telecommunications, steel industry, so on and so forth, railroad, oil, everything, the starting point was a state investment. And it was necessary. And you know why? Because the private capital at the time was very thin, domestic capital. And the international was not yet highly interested in putting money there. So I used to refer to the example of the steel industry in Brazil. In Brazil is very well known, the company Volta Redonda was the first steel company in Brazil. And the company became a state company because the United States Steel Corporation refused to invest in Brazil. Then the Vargas government, this was at the end of the 30s, made a kind of game, and he tried to attract the Germans just before the war. So he approached the group in Germany, but the group also refused to invest. At the end, Vargas made a deal with Roosevelt, and Roosevelt decided to open a credit at the Ex-Import Bank, American, and the Brazilians start the company there as state company because of that, because no one would have, the trust in putting money in a big steel corporation in Brazil. They just said, "Oh, this is not profitable." So the government was there. Anyhow, if you look at Mexico, was the same. If you look, Chile was the same. I mean, the main countries in Latin America use the state as an instrument to produce a economic transformation. And how this was done? Through taxes, taxation. And this has been done at the expenses of the social investment. So the governments used to concentrate much more in the economic realm than in education, health, not to speak in other more sophisticated kinds of social policies. So it's very impressive the fact that some countries in Latin America performed quite well in economic terms, but very badly in social terms. If you look at Brazil, this is clear. In the 70s, Brazil was moving up in the economic terms at a pace of 8% per year, steadily, all along the decade. And if you look what happened with infant mortality, my God, was going up. And if you look in the area of sanitation, again, the same, a disaster. And meanwhile, in all these countries, profound transformation were occurring at the demographic level because of internal migration, in some cases external migration, but internal migration. The demographic rate of growth was very impressive, normally between 3% and 4% per year, which is awful because it's impossible then to take care of people. So in our case was around 3.5% per year in the 70s. Now it's 1.1. So it's coming down. At that period, from the 70s up to the 90s, we had then tremendous difficulties to deal with because the government was investing, the population was growing up, and when democracy came back again in the 80s, the enormous popular pressure to get more education, more health, more roads, more everything, agrarian reform, how to do that. And on top of that, the whole region suffered enormously from the oil crisis in the 70s and at the beginning of the 80s. So inflation. Latin America was considered then the region of income concentration, inflation, poverty, and lack of economic impetus. These were the 80s. In the 90s, some transformations occurred in several countries because at the end of the 80s, several countries became formally open from the political point of view, democratic. And they start to try to adjust to the new challenges. I would say, if you look from today back, I would say that at least 3 countries have been capable to improve their capacities to become more integrated at the global level. One is Mexico, because of the integration with the United States. We can judge good or bad. Is a Mexican problem? I don't know. As a sociologist, if I look Mexico improved a lot in terms of different indicators in the economic area, social area, and finally even some degrees to democracy. So the Mexicans said that they took the decision to link their destiny to USA, for good or for bad. They are linked to the driving force coming from the United States. Of course, it's not just that, but this has been very important to reorganize the Mexican system. The Chileans are quite far away from the United States, and the economy in Chile has no parallel capacity compared to Mexico or to Brazil. Chile is a small nation. It has maybe 10% in terms of GDP or in terms of population comparing to Brazil. But the Chileans have had the good idea to understand what's going on across the globe, and they understood that the important thing would be to be up to date with some novelties. How to produce a good design, how to be capable to create a good label, how to control the trade circuit. And they use a very small natural resource base, not just copper they have ever, but they add to that, they add the wine, oysters, and fruits, so on and so forth. Oysters, I think, is a very good example, because it's highly sophisticated to produce oysters, salmon, and to sell in Paris in the other day. This is a very complex logistical problem. It requires sophistication. It requires enormous capacity from the point of view of the government, point of view of the means of transportation, the capacity of people to behave properly. So they did that, and they have been capable, to open a kind of a space at the international global trade. The third one was Brazil. Brazil is different because Brazil is far away from the United States. We cannot just engage with the American economy. And Brazil is big in terms of the size of the domestic market. Has to look inward all time because you have people there and you have possibilities to make profits by using the domestic market. So in the case of Brazil, it was extremely difficult to convince the Brazilian entrepreneurs that they had capacity to compete and they had to compete globally, because it's easier to compete internally, domestically, under the protection of the state. So when democracy came in Brazil, we had to also to try to reorganize the state and to try to convince the local entrepreneurs that it would be necessary to increase competition. By chance, I became a finance minister. And when I stress by chance, it is because it was by chance. I was, at the time, foreign minister. It's okay, foreign minister could be. I had some training. I lived in different parts of the world, so I could be acceptable former minister. And I was very happy being foreign minister. You cannot imagine how good it is to be foreign minister in a country like Brazil, without enemies. It's wonderful. We can travel abroad. We are always very well received in Japan, in China, in the United States, or in neighboring countries, so on and so forth. Wonderful. So I was foreign minister. I went to Japan because the previous government had made a tremendous mistake with the Japanese. The Japanese are highly formal people. Brazilians are not. And our then president, named Collor, and mainly the minister of finance was a woman, went to Japan, and she was not polite with the Japanese. It was a disaster. So I went to Japan, well, to show that some Brazilians, at least, capable to behave properly. I don't know if I was capable, but anyhow I tried. When I was coming back to Brazil, through New York, I received a phone call from the president. I was in a dinner, in Brazilian ambassador to the United Nations House, and the president asked me to become finance minister. I said, this is a crazy thing. It's better not to do that. I'm so happy being foreign minister. And I don't know how to explain, in foreign countries, because I will be the fourth finance minister in 7 months. The inflation was enormous. I don't know, 30% per month, a disaster. Well, but anyhow, I went to the hotel to sleep, and during night the president appointed me as finance minister. I used to tell the story. My wife early in the morning called me on the phone. She said, Are you crazy? I said, no, you are lying. So I don't know if I was a crazy man or lying. The point is that I became finance minister, and we had to try to curb inflation. It was okay. I don't go into detail because it's very complicated. But anyhow, I did. With people, of course, not me. I am not an economist. And I will relate this with democracy to explain to you why. But the point is that what was important then was not just to stabilize the economy. It was to reduce tariffs and to force the Brazilian entrepreneurs to compete globally. This was extremely difficult. I am from São Paulo. São Paulo is the core of the industrial sector in Brazil. So my friends from São Paulo put on my shoulders enormous pressure not to continue to decrease tariffs. I did. This is terrible, because if you are decreasing tariff, you know that some sectors will suffer the consequence. Others will be capable to overcome. And maybe later on, those who have suffered the consequence, bad consequence, will be replaced by others, more competent and be capable to go ahead. So in the name of the nation, in the name of the state, you have to reduce. If you look to your friends, better not to reduce, because they will be undermined by the lack of protection. But we did. And the point is that Brazil became much more capable to compete. So now I don't go into detail, but in different areas we have possibility, and we are, in fact, competing. Some Brazilian enterprises are working globally, so on and so forth. Well, and what democracy has to do with all that? The point is that I start by saying that it was possible to invest heavily in the economic sector because of the lack of democracy. The authoritarian regimes used the taxation to improve the economy, not disdaining the social areas. With democracy, it will be impossible. Being in government, it's it's clear, it's simple to realize that social pressure is so high that you have to do something. You have to do something in terms of education. You have to do something in terms of health. You have to do something in terms of agrarian reform. And in different aspects, you have to behave in a different way. So democracy counts, not just because of elections, not just because of freedom. All this is very important. But it counts as well as because democracy allows people to organize themselves and to put more pressure. So what is new in Latin America is not just democracy. Democracy we had before the Cold War. But our democracy nowadays is a different one, because it's based not just in our love for values, democratic values, but it's also based on the fact that society become more organized, the citizenship exists, and is putting more and more pressure on governments. It's no more possible to do something without, some kind of transparency. Some kind of, you have to render what you did, render accounts to people. You have to be accountable. Transparency and accountability are not vague notions. It came from the roots of society, because they are asking you to behave in a different way. So our democracy now is a different kind of democracy, much more, I would say, substantive democracy than just formal democracy. So very often, when some people are criticizing democracy by saying, well, democracy is important, but for whom? For those who are in power. But the people has not to do with that, because the poor people, no. The poor people can be also benefited by democracy. And insofar as society is also transformed under the umbrella of democracy, and the civil society is more strength and more capable to ask for something, some specific causes, the whole society changes. And the whole way how government behave also changes. I'll give you very simple examples. It's no more possible just, suppose I decide as president to to send a bill to the Congress or even decree changing the way how we used to do public auctions. It would be impossible to do that without make some hearings, without putting the available through the computers to the web a draft proposal. The draft proposal is received by people, by some people, the interested people, maybe even lobbyists, and they will react to you. So you looked at that, you have to make the discount of the kind of consideration that has been made, and then you redraft your bill and you send to Congress. Within the Congress again, Congress has hearings, so the interested people has to come. If you want to build a new dam for energy, well, this is a nightmare because of environment. You have to ask people, do you allow with that? What the consequences are in terms of environment? This is quite new. It was not like that before the 90s. So after the 90s, after the new wave of democracy in Latin America, we are not just discussing the formal democracy. We are discussing a substantive democracy. And substantive democracy is heavily based on each people, individuals. It's not just the masses, individuals. Each one wants to have a say. I'm exaggerating. Lots of people don't have any say. But as the trend is they want to have a say. And this is not a new form of pure individualism, because normally these individuals are also socially committed. They have a social dimension, but they want to know by themselves, yes or no, yes or no. They are not just happy because they voted and the man who represents them is taking decision. The Congress, normally is not highly respected in respect of the fact that he was elected. And why? Because normally the Congress is not capable, to be accountable to the people. If we elect a president, I got, I don't know, dozens of millions of votes, 50 million votes. This was the electoral day. In the other day, this is nothing, because I have to perform. I have to get the approval day by day. No more. The legitimacy is not just, the consequence of vote. So if Weber was still alive, or if Tocqueville, or if Montesquieu, not to speak about Rousseau in terms of general will, there is no more general will. It's a different way to organize things. Of course, we have representative democracy. Of course, behind this Montesquieu. But it is also true that there are others thinking about the new format of the process of the legitimation. And the legitimation came from the deliberative process. If you engage people in the process of deliberation, so you have more chance to be successful. If you are behaving just because you have the formal power to impose, maybe you can be capable to do it, but to how long time? Probably for a very short period of time. So it's much more complicated to work within the democracy in our days. And this is our challenge in our countries. And I must say that in several countries, the democratic system failed, the old one, because it was highly formal, because it was not competent enough to deliver, because it was not looking to people's demand, was looking inside to vested interest within the political system, and then collapsed. When this occurred, the probability of a demagogue to take power is very high. I don't want to refer to specific cases. It's not polite, but you know. So this is what is occurring in some areas. Not always the same. You cannot judge that what is occurring in Latin America now is a wave toward the left. It's not that. It's different. Since each country gave different answers to the same challenges, in some countries it was possible to reinforce democracy. Meanwhile, in other countries, democracy is at stake, at risk, jeopardized. There is no homogeneity in what we used to call the left in Latin America. Take Uruguay. Uruguay now is ruled by traditional parties from the left, including former Tupamaro people. And they had the president of Uruguay, I know him, he's a good man, but he has been always close to the far leftist groups in Uruguay. But Uruguay is behaving democratically. Democracy is being reinforced in Uruguay. Uruguay is being capable to understand the challenge of globalization. Uruguay is not to attempt to go back in order to give an answer. Uruguay is keeping democracy open. Or Chile. I said to you, I lived in Chile. When I was there in the 60s, the socialists and the Christian Democrats were enemies. They are fighting each other. After Pinochet, they decided to unite. So Chile is governed by a kind of, they named the coalition between the socialists and the Christian Democrats. In the past, the socialists were very close to Marxist ideas and far revolutionaries, much more than the communists before Pinochet. Now, the president of Chile is a friend of mine. He's also a professor at Brown now with me. We are very good friends. He replaced me as head of the Club of Madrid very recently. Ricardo Lagos, he's a socialist from Chile. And what is the difference between Lagos and myself? None. In terms of what we think about, how we are trying to implement our policy, we did in Chile or in Brazil, under the umbrella of democracy, you see? So how to compare this with, let's put Chavez. Chavez is a quite different situation because the Venezuelan democracy failed enormously. And when President Caldera was elected, he was just before Chavez. Caldera was a very, very enlightened man, but an old man with old style, impossible to cope with the Venezuelan people's demand. So Chavez came. And Chavez preferred to go straight, not respecting the formalities of democracy and keeping the substance of democracy. I don't know to what extent, depends. Anyhow, if you go to Bolivia, it's another situation. Bolivia is the first time ever that an indigenous man is the head of state. In Bolivia, up very recently, if you went to the Bolivian Congress, no one indigenous was there. And the indigenous population is the majority population. How is that possible? So now that they are vindicating in the tradition, so on and so forth. I understand. Maybe I can criticize here and there, but I have to understand why is this occurring. So if we cannot put all together as if all of them non-formally democratic or some more populist kinds of regime are similar. They are not similar. There are some differentiations, and the differentiations depend also on history. I don't want to bore you too much. I will send to you, I promise, a paper I wrote about how it would be possible to, starting from the dependency theory, to understand the nowadays differentiation and why some countries have become less democratic, others more democratic, because there are some bases, structural bases to explain why some have been more successful than others. Well, and the point is that, so my view is that democracy has some problems in Latin America, has problems in general, because this is, is a process in progress. Democracy now requires much more than just party system, elections, so on and so forth. Requires the content, the different contents of the decision-making process, requires more participation, more deliberations, not instead of representation, but together with representation to expand a little bit more the idea of democratic values. It requires a new look for the theory of democracy. And democracy in Latin America or in poor countries have to simultaneously try to solve the economic challenges and the social challenges. My point is democracy counts for poor people. If you look what happened in Latin America, probably Chile was the first one, Brazil and Mexico are the more successful countries in dealing with poverty reduction. And the three of countries, Mexico is a little bit more controversial in terms of to what extent true democracy is there. Is making some progress, but yet you have some. They have to work more. Anyhow, in Chile and Brazil, yes, democracy is there. In Brazil, it's quite clear. The opposition, my opposition now is government, No problem at all. Of course, I would prefer to be there. Not me, but my party, anyhow. But anyhow, this is the rule of the game. And we are not afraid, because if I don't do that. I never make criticism abroad. But in Brazil, I do very high criticism vis-a-vis the government from time to time, without any problem. No problem, because it's normal. As it was normal when I was in government. I was highly criticized by the working class party and by Lula. We start from the same point against the military regime. We have very good personal relations, but anyhow, we but we criticize each other very strongly, without any problem. I can go back home without any preoccupations if I give a press conference criticizing the government. This is normal. So we have democracy in Brazil. And we are reducing poverty and even disparity, income disparity. It's not brilliant, but anyhow, we are making progress. I'll give you data. The poverty line in Brazil comes down from around 40% of the population in 1992 to 30% in 95. Why? Because of the stabilization program. Stopping inflation means automatically the better off of poor people. Because the poor don't have any way to evade inflation, to be protected from inflation. Rich people have banking accounts. So the banking accounts can be, because of indexation, you can correct what the inflation is undermining your deposit. But the poor people, they received salary. And if the inflation is, it was in Brazil at one point in time, 40% in 1 month. So at the end of the year, the month, 40% less. So as far as you receive the money, it has to go straight to the supermarket or nowhere to buy things. Because otherwise, it's impossible to buy later on. So when you stop that, immediately the consequences are very, very positive. That's why I was elected president. I will tell you, I was in New York University, and a friend of mine was Mexican foreign minister, Jorge Castañeda, asked me to give a talk like today here. And at the end, he said he was foreign minister and he would be president. He said, how is it possible for a foreign minister to become president? I said, very simply, you have to be appointed finance minister. So I was elected president because I was with my team. We solved the main problem for poor people, inflation. So, but after that, this is once for all. As far as you have the stabilization, the reduction is very, very rapid, but it became also hard to reduce further on. So how to reduce, and why was democracy important to the continuity of reduction of poverty line in Brazil, or in Chile, or in Mexico? Because what I said before, people's pressure. So we did an agrarian reform in Brazil. Altogether is 1 million people, meaning if you multiply by 4 or 5 because of children, 40 or 50 million people being benefited by agrarian reform. It's not just because they have a small piece of land or a big piece of land. It's because they have also schools. They have, credit for the production. So this is a profound transformation. Secondly, we decide because of pressure. Of course, it was also my will, but my will alone is nothing. It depends on, even for agrarian reform, without the pressure coming from the landless movement, it would be impossible to do agrarian reform. The pressure was against me. But anyhow, I think that it was important to have this pressure to get approval in Congress of several bills, easing the process of agrarian reform. Then we decided to increase the minimum wage. The Brazilian minimum wage is being increased since 1993 steadily, as an average 4% per year. Altogether, it is doubling in 15 years. So this is important because the minimum wage means that those who are retired, the pensioners and retired people, they basically receive 1 or 2 minimum wages. and also because this gives you to the market, a sign of the minimum possible wage. And thirdly, because we decide to expand education, to include more people in schooling system. So nowadays, 97% of Brazilian students are attending schools. And in the Brazilian, this means 35 million students, at the second, fundamental level. And in every day they receive at least one meal. And they have, by free books, the Brazilian government has to distribute around 100 million books every 2 years. 100 million books. Nobody knows that. Nobody counts that. But this is what is promoting, some better off in the overall situation. Then, the Constitution said we had a new Constitution in 88. I was one of the deputy rapporteur to the Brazilian Constitution. It's a very controversial constitution, but anyhow, assure civil rights there and freedom. And also make the design of a welfare state. I used to say in Brazil that we are no more developing, underdeveloped country, we are unjust. And we never had a welfare state. We have a state of illness, because it was very bad, the state. So now the Constitution is at least proposing a new model for Brazilian society, including the state has the obligation to offer by free Medicare. This was a desire. Well, we transformed this desire into reality. We did that. And this is going on. It's not good. The educational level is not good. The quality of education is terrible. The amount of time, the number of hours that students every day stays at school is minimum. 4 hours, that's not enough. So there are lots of problems. Anyhow, we are going ahead in spite of all that. As a consequence, as a summing up, we continue to, then we decide also to introduce a novelty. The novelty was to redistribute money directly. Cash transfer from the federal government to the mothers, provide the family had children and the children were attending schools. This was called Bolsa Escola, school fellowship. We had several fellowships. Then President Lula put all together and gave another name, Bolsa Familia, family fellowship, and doubled the number of people receiving from 5.5 million to 11 million people. That is to say, you multiply by 4, again, it's an enormous amount of people, maybe overlapping with the agrarian reform people, because some of them are also receiving that. Anyhow, several policies. So now the poverty line was reduced from 30 to 23% of the population. All this from 40 to 23, from 94 up to today, less than 15 years. The same is occurring in Mexico. They are making progress. And in Chile more dramatically, more quickly. You see? I don't know to what extent this has not been done in Peru. So I would say the situation in Peru in terms of democracy, you remember that Humala was about to be elected in Peru. And there is a risk there. Because the social situation is really dramatic and without hope. The Brazilian situation is also dramatic, but with hope. People believe that it will be possible in the future to be better off. And some signals are being sent in that direction. The same applies to Chile. The same applies to even to Colombia. But that's not true in Bolivia, not true in Ecuador, not true in Peru, not true in Nicaragua. So it's not too much surprise that from time to time in these countries we have a kind of populism or authoritarian trend because of that. We have to understand why this occurs, and you have to try to transform society, transform the practices we have in policy, in our policies, in our political system, to take care of people's demands and necessities. But the point is that you are reducing poverty, and in the case of Brazil, we're also reducing disparity, income disparity, the Gini coefficient. I was very happy when I read the 2000 year book by the World Bank showing that we had made some progress. Now it's quite clear. If you compare 1992 or 93 to nowadays. In 1992, we were at 0.60. Now we are at 0.54. It's difficult to move 6 points in the Gini coefficient. So this means that we are becoming a little bit less, unequal. Attention, this is income inequality, not wealth inequality. And wealth inequality is still more dramatic than income inequality. So we are not going toward an egalitarian society. Well, maybe if we continue to have democracy, if we continue to understand that democracy is not just formality, that democracy means also another way of relationship between people, and that people count and people has to have a say, and if the government is sensitive to that, and the people is capable to elect good government, and good government depends on circumstances. For instance, President Lula practically continued what I did in the economic area and amplify what I did in the social area. So it's okay. Why should I criticize him? Of course, in the electoral days, yes, I do. But by different motives, not the case to say today here. But anyhow, in Chile, again, they have continuity. It's very important to have some degrees of continuity. It's impossible to promote social change, to promote the better off of population, changing minister as in the past every 3 months, 4 months, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Health, Minister of Education. It's impossible. We have to be some degrees of stability. So, to conclude, because I spoke too much to you, I think that these are the questions you have to face in Latin America. We are making progress. There are lots of things to be done ahead. And to rethink about democracy is not just, my responsibility or Latin Americans' responsibilities. It's also your responsibilities, because this is a global challenge. It's a global challenge, how to promote democracy in such a way that it could be, again, available to believe in democracy. How can you mobilize young people if you don't believe in something, in some dream? If you don't have an utopia? And if the utopia is distinct from the well-being of people, what kind of utopia could be? Only fundamentalism. So you have to promise after you're died. But that's not the democratic way. That's not the political way. The political way is to pave a road toward your goal. It's not enough to say, I like that. How I will get that? This is the political man. Maybe a priest can, from the pulpit can day and night, promise you the heaven. But the political man has to be much more realistic without being, blind to dreams, without being blind to utopias. You have to believe, otherwise it's impossible to transmit to the people the inspiration necessary to move massive societies. So this is our challenge, and I hope you'll be very helpful in the future in the United States, and to elect a good people to try to help us to understand a little bit more and better how can we reorganize the world, not just American society, but the world, because that is the question. I don't want to elaborate too much on that, but it's the same problem. Democracy is always in progress. It's always a process, but we have to be engaged in that process, and we have to have faith. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know how to... Thank you. Thank you. In Brazil, every time when people start applauding me too much, I say, take care, I will repeat what I said. Thank you.
We had lunch this morning with Judge George Payne, and after President Cardoso spoke, he said how lucky Brazil was to have such an enlightened leader, and were we so lucky to have such an enlightened leader? So I wanted to, we have time for a couple of questions, and I wanted to start off with one. I believe at one point you were asked to mediate between George Bush and Hugo Chavez. You mentioned, is that true?
Yeah.
Would you tell that?
Yeah, I can tell you. It's true, not to mediate, but anyhow, some kind. This was the first time I came to America after President Bush election, and we had a meeting as usual, and President Bush was anxious because we had to have another summit on the presidential hemispheric presidents in Quebec, and it will be the first ever meeting led by President Bush, and President Bush said, well, you know, this man, Chavez, is coming, and I know he's very aggressive, and I never will accept the fact that he came here to put his finger on my eyes or my nose, I don't know what. I said, well, President, it's not like that. I know him, he's impulsive, but it's not like that. And how I can maybe say a word to him, because we have, before Quebec, we have a meeting in Brasilia, and I'll try to see what can be done. But be sure, he's not like that. So when President Chavez came to Brasilia, we had a lunch, and I told him, well, the man there is believed that you are going to aggress him. I think it is better for you to be polite, extremely polite, because you know, the expectancy is another one. This is a point for you if you be polite. So be polite. He said, well, you know me. I am enthusiastic. Every time I go to OPEP meetings in the Middle East, when I start speaking, it seems that I'm going to proclaim the republic there. So the Emir of Qatar is a friend of mine, has a deal with me. When I'm exaggerating, he makes like that to me. And I became more calm. Okay, so we went to Quebec in this meeting. And President Bush asked me, or the State Department and Foreign Affairs in Brazil, that I had to open up the session, which is unusual. Normally, either the President of the Canada or the President of the United States. But anyhow, it was a crowded room with 1,000 or more people there. And the excuse for me to open the session, the formal session, was that I can speak in the 4 different languages across the hemisphere. So I did this kind of thing to be nice. I spoke in English, in French, in Spanish, and Portuguese. Okay. But I gave a strong speech on the preconditions for Brazil, for Latin America, to enter into the FTAA, the trade agreement alongside the hemisphere. Very strong. So Chavez was 3 or 3 rows behind me. He jumped the seat. He came to me. He said like that. So you see, this is the difference of style between some presidents.
So we have time for a couple of questions. Yes.
Yeah, I understand. Well, okay. I think that it's important to have treaties and agreements on trade. You see, we have in South Congo Mercosur. Mercosur is, is an excellent attempt, but with some difficulties in implementing Mercosur because of the idea of sovereignty, which is very profoundly rooted in our societies, and because there is a disparity of size between Brazil and Uruguay, Paraguay. It's difficult, but anyhow, it's there. And I think that it will be important to have this hemispheric free trade agreement, provided, as I said, in Quebec, the preconditions are there. That is to say, we have to see some specific rules to coordinate the free trade. You see, so if this could be done, it would be positive. I must say that in Brazil, this is not the common reaction. The reaction is highly fragmented. It depends on in which area of the economy. Some people are afraid that the competition in the United States will damage them. In other way, the Americans also have some problems because of agriculture. So it's difficult, and we cannot go straight to a free trade agreement, but I think it's important. What has been done is damaging to the Brazilian interests, because now you have bilateral agreements with the United States. We have already with Mexico and Canada. Now we have with Central America and the Caribbean, with Colombia, with Peru, with Chile. So Mercosur is becoming isolated. And this is bad for us. This is our fault, not American fault, because we decided to go that way. But the point is that insofar as Americans, USA, has a binational agreement, or even multinational agreement, it means that there is a so-called clause of the more favored nation. I don't know in English how to say, cláusula da nación más favorecida. In that case, what occurs is that the agreements we have under the umbrella of another international treaty, ALADI, we are losing vis-à-vis the United States, because the United States has another agreement with the other countries. So the situation is not good for Brazil now, for the Mercosur. But because we have been too much, to my mind, too much shy in debating, discussing the possibility of a more ample kind of trade agreement. And on top of that, we have to see what will be reached at WTO, because WTO is more important than everything. Yeah? So at that level, Brazil is trying to pose, our cards with energy. I think it's okay. You have to do that. We made some, coalitions with India and China and South Africa and other countries. But we have to do that, but trying to converge, trying to reach the final decision, final goal, because it will be necessary to have much more free trade, mainly for the newcomers, what so-called emerging nations, emerging economies. The point is that we count on China and India, and not necessarily the interests of China or India coincide with the Brazilians' interests. So from time to time we have to, as I used to say, we need a kind of variable geometry to approach who the enemies or who the friends are. And we don't have stable friends or stable enemies at the international trade. We have to be more subtle and more capable, more sophisticated in trying to have a strategy, as the Chinese have. The Chinese are master in doing what is of their interest, because they have long-term interests. They are looking 50 years ahead, and you are looking normally 5 years back. So that is the situation. Well, it's difficult to answer to your question, because it will require a profound change in the way how the Americans are behaving the last decades. You see, first of all, with respect to United Nations, I think it was a mistake not to give more strength to United Nations. I understand difficulties, because United States is composed now by 100, 70, I don't know how many countries. So, and the unevenness of these people is difficult. But the point is that you have to organize some international fora to try to solve problems. On the other hand, I think that it's also necessary to take into account that diversity exists. And if United States has the idea that every part of the world will be a democracy like America, is condemned to failure, because it's impossible. It's impossible. So that is not to say that some universal values don't have to be enforced. There are universal values, human rights, equality between men and women, no to torture. This is a core of universal values. This has to be respected. But the way how each country organizes itself in terms of the political system, well, it's impossible to diffuse the American way. How can we? You can do that maybe in Brazil. This is done already. Because we came from the similar, cultural tradition. We are Westerns, as I said this morning. We are far Westerns, but Westerns anyhow. So our culture is more similar to your culture, to the European culture. But it's not true in Russia. Even in Russia, it's difficult. You know now what is occurring in Russia. How to imagine China? The Chinese are building up a new system of democratic, I don't know to what extent, processes. They are trying to do what can be implemented there. Certainly will be not like our system. And, well, the Islamic world. I mean, more specifically, not the Islamic world, because within the Islam, in some countries, democracy is there. Indonesia, for instance. But it's not true for the Arabic world, which is different from the whole embracing Islamic world. The Arabic world, they have another tradition. So it's impossible to impose our way of life. It's impossible. So as far as the United States is not convinced that, well, this is a wonderful, your ways of life, but cannot be generalized because of different tradition, different history, different perceptions, so on and so forth. So the question is how to live together, how to understand the order, and what are the limits of that. And I think that this has been, that's why I started by saying it's a pity that the United Nations has been undermined by different forces, not just by the United States, undermined because we don't have now a specific place to debate about the future of humanity. And the idea of humanity, which in the past, those of who read Marx know that for Marx, humanity is a kind of mystification. And why? Because of social classes. He said, it will be possible to speak about humanity only when one class, the universal class, the proletariat, will be the ruling class across the world. Otherwise, it's a mystification. Well, Mr. Gorbachev said the opposite. Gorbachev, at the end of the Soviet Union, said, well, it's no more possible to think on ecology, on environment, or on war in terms of nation or classes, because the atomic energy, atomic bomb will destroy both sides, and because environment has no respect to boundaries. So the idea is the humanity again. So there are, universal problems in terms of humanity. This is a new subject of history, not yet completely concrete. But anyhow, I think some thoughts about what is the importance of humanity vis-a-vis each country has to be, again, addressed. That's what I refer when I said democracy is not a problem for us, it's for everyone. If you understand not one specific kind of democracy, but the general sense of the acceptation of the other, differences, diversity, not homogeneity. That is the key for the future, I guess.
So President Cardoso said earlier you can't ask a Brazilian to give a short answer to a question.
That's true.
So I'm afraid that just with those two questions we have to thank you very much for coming here today.
Thank you.